Delighted to have with me three representatives of the Singapore Reinsurers Association for a brief fireside chat. Now, the association has been very supportive over the years, so I wanted to say a big thank you, as we've benefited from their support in helping us to let the local market know about this event over the years. So I thought it'd be great to actually get them on stage so that we can talk a little bit about the region, about Singapore, and a bit about the association as well. I thought it might be a nice way to kick off the second or the final part of the day. So delighted to have at the far end Marc Haushofer, who's chairman of the association, and then next to him we have Kenrick, who's the deputy chair of the association, but also the regional CEO of Allianz Re. And then next to me we have Victor Cook, who is an executive committee member of the association, but also CEO of Swiss Re Asia. So delighted to have three important people in the local and regional reinsurance industry with us today. And I thought perhaps to begin we'll just start with some comments from each of them about the state of the reinsurance market in Asia at this time, and we'll start with Marc up at the end.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thanks for having us, and I see at least a few more people here now than before lunch. I hope we can keep you awake for the next 20 minutes, and then it's over to Paul. So just a few comments from our side. Now, obviously, I'm mindful of time, so it will be a little more like bullet point style, punchy. So, I mean, we are all here for a reason, and obviously, most of us are coming here with an ILS background. This is not to that extent, at least, the case for the three of us here. So why are we here? I mean, obviously, we all realize that in terms of opportunities, I think Asia is still full of it. Yeah, so it's an extremely big region. It's fast growing. In some areas, it's maybe a little fast growing, but as such, it's very important. And we all know there are a lot of opportunities waiting for us. Most markets aren't saturated, and the protection gaps, as we all know, are quite significant. And yet, I'm, I would say, cautiously optimistic. Why is that? Often, I would say the material of data which we are getting from Asia are not really in brilliant shape yet. And even if they seem to be reasonably good, because we are all making improvements here and progress and so on, it's from a commercial side, I think it's very difficult to sell them. So Asian reinsurance buyers are very cost sensitive, and brokers trade since many years with this in mind. So that makes, we do understand this, but at the same time it makes our life not necessarily easier. And then we have in the region a prominent risk losses. We have marine business, which shows a lot of man-made losses. So in terms of, if you use the phrase of emerging, I think Asia is still, most of Asia very much at an emerging state. And that, of course, as I said at the beginning, includes a lot of opportunities, but it equally also means that we still are facing a lot of challenges.
So from my side, I would like to leave you with 2 points. The first one is I keep on mentioning about what a difference a year made. So if you remember about 18 months ago, the market was really tight, not only on the retro side, but also reinsurance side. And 18 months later, and all of a sudden, all the capacity came back. And that led to, in terms of margin expectation, whatever you have in Asia is slightly different from what you see in US and Europe. So from our head office in Germany, for example, when they see the rate changes in Europe and compare with what you see here in Asia, they rather put the capital in some other market. So not meaning that Asia is not a good market, but in terms of expectation, it would be slightly different. That's point number one. Number two is we always talk about protection gap in the society and so on. There's also a big protection gap in the insurance industry. Let me explain why. Couple of months ago, I was in China, and then I visited a client, and they were talking about what a wonderful cat program that they have. And they show us in a chart, their cat aggregate has been growing 10, 15% on average per annum. But on the next slide, they show that the cat program's limit is actually constant for the last 10 years. So it shows that they are actually bearing a lot of risk themselves without buying proper reinsurance cover. If we can find a way to unlock that, that would create a lot of opportunities, not only for reinsurers, but also for the ILS market as well. So those are the 2 points I would like to leave to you guys.
Yeah, so maybe I just add a couple of points from my side. So I think sitting through it this morning is interesting because the challenges that I think you guys talked about is not very different in terms of the challenge that we face, right? So data, model, knowledge, yeah, because the understanding of the buyers of what they are buying is not really that strong. The piece that Marc talked about cautiously optimistic about the growth, right? So from the Swiss Re standpoint, we see the growth in Southeast Asia and India is going to be the strongest in the next 5 years. And this is the area where you need to be in because Singapore is a perfect platform for us to engage business, particularly the area that you're looking at IRS, unless you want to do some of that from Hong Kong as well. But this is really one of the two choices that you have. But the education that is important because not many people, we were talking over lunch just now, outside of this room, how many of the people actually understand the stuff that we guys talk about today, right? Because not many. So there's quite a lot of work that we need to do as a kind of a platform or as an association in terms of how we educate, the people out there, right? But the optimistic view that we have is I think the growth will continue to drive. And there's not many places around the world where you see such a strong growth in this part of the world. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Will. So yeah, that's Asia as a region, but let's think a bit more about Singapore as a hub for that region as well, and obviously developed a very successful insurance and reinsurance market here, continuing to grow, and the expertise builds all the time. But what are your hopes for sort of Singapore as a regional hub for this industry? And what is the association doing to sort of continue to expand the level of expertise here focused on reinsurance? And maybe we'll start with Kenrick this time.
Okay, all right. Well, again, 2 points. Number one is relating to talent, something that we constantly fight with other industries. So what we're doing right now is very much data-based. So we need more and more data scientists in our house. But when it comes to data scientists, we go head to head with the Facebook of this world, Google of this world. The question is, how can we bring these expert or talents into our industry? So that's something that we need to think about. And then leading to the second point, we see that our local regulators on the floor. So something that we prefer like to have is proactive regulatory environment. How to keep ourselves relevant in the region, how we can provide a platform for risk exchange, and also all those dialogues. So I think that those are the things which are important to us.
Great. Victor, anything to add?
No, I think so Singapore has one of the more forward-looking regulator, right? So MAS. So if you look at the number of forward-looking themes, right? So MAS is already looking at that. So what we hope to happen is there will be more regulations around it. How do we do some of, for example, alternative risk transfer? So that's something will help, the Singapore platform continue to evolve because they're already quite ahead. And then linking the point that Kenrick mentioned, right? So it's people. There's a lot of professionals in Singapore. You don't see that in other places. We need to continue to have that because one of the discussions I had with the Hong Kong authorities was exactly the same thing. So how do we, or Hong Kong, do what Singapore have, right? Most of the time, the first question, where are the people? They're not in Hong Kong. They're not in a number of Southeast Asian countries, but they are in Singapore. So this is something that is very unique here, and it's something that we can continue to use it to drive our business.
And maybe Marc, you can talk a little bit about.
I got 3, but they're quick. And 2, you guys have been touched upon already. The first one is, I think this is an extremely well-regulated place. And it makes our life much easier. Why? Because first of all, a lot of things are in a way predictable, which is good. So which means you can rely on Singapore, the MAS as a regulator, but also our working environment here is less, I would say, volatile than maybe in some other parts of Asia. So that's really good. Number two, the regulator here achieves something which I also consider it's a highly professional and even tough regulator, and yet it always disposes a sort of a commercial mind. So they keep a very good balance, which is, I would say, very helpful and very hard to find. I have, we expressed this because you asked what the SRA is also doing. So, of course, part of our work is also that if we feel something is like, in terms of market protectionism also is wrong and makes the free trade, which we as the industry really, because it's a global industry, there are a couple of regional players, but we are as such a global industry, and we need to trade freely and fairly. And this is not always the case. So we have been bringing this up here and there. It's not easy, yeah, and the latest example is what is happening in India, so that cross-border reinsurance companies are to afford a collateral for the liabilities they are taking into, and it has to be even on top of that from an Indian bank. That is, for those who are not based in India, an extra burden, which I would also, on behalf of the SRA, consider as a challenge. Let's put it this way. Yeah. And the last one is you guys spoke about talent. I think we all realize that it's new talent, new technologies, new whatever AI knowledge stuff which we don't have to that extent, cyber, whatever. But there's one more thing I also like to mention. We make, as an industry, huge effort to bring up the next generation, but the MAS and the government here is realizing also that this is very important. They have also made a substantial contribution going forward, because so in terms of financial aid, that is also happening here.
Yeah, and that's all very important to hear.
Yeah.
You alluded to sort of reinsurance uptake in the region and protection gaps, and I wonder perhaps if you could talk a little more about that and the opportunity there for reinsurance capital in general, some of which could be ILS, and maybe we can start with you, Victor.
Yeah, so I think one of the topics that we covered today is cyber, right? So I think cyber is one of the areas that I think we need to find a way to provide capacity to in this part of the world. And the second one is protection gap. I think somebody mentioned it as well, right? The protection gap currently in Asia is more than 90%. Yeah, and unfortunately has been increasing over the number of years. So despite all the things that everyone's trying to address protection gap in this part of the world, right, it's not really working very well. And one of the reasons is because the exposures is going up faster than premium. That's because of urbanizations, people are getting healthier and wealthier and healthier, and a number of things, right? So that's going up a lot quicker. But even with the hardening cycle that we've seen in the last 18 months or so, is not making it better. So I think one of the things that, putting it in front of everybody here is what is it that, or what does it take for us to address at least 20% more of that? Yeah, is it to do with more ILS kind of solutions, looking at some of the financing house in terms of how they want to protect it, right? But if you look at ILS, right, there's still a lot of ILS is not from this part of the world. The placement that you have in Hong Kong and Singapore in the last 2 years or so, right? So they are not from here. So what does it take for us to look at, right? So one of the things could be the regulations to recognize the capital relief that you get from IRS. So that's not something that is accepted by a broad-based regulator at the moment, right? So these are some of the things that I think we need to figure out how do we do it, and the lobbying will be important for us to push it as well.
Kenrick, anything to add on?
Sustainability and ESG is very high on Allianz Group's agenda. So I'm glad that finally, after the first two panel, the panel before lunch, Alex and Esther, they mentioned about sustainability and renewable energy sector and how we could support that, because all the countries are going through the energy transition period, right? So there are a lot of people moving away from the brown energy and invested a lot into green energy. And China and India are the two largest country in terms of investment in green energy sector. So the questions for us is how can we promote that? What can we do in order to put more capital and capacity into this transition period? Because everybody's investing a lot of money and effort into that. So there's got to be some way that we could also help that development as well.
Yeah. My observation, in addition to what my colleague said, first of all, I mentioned that already. I think data are still, I would say, weak in many parts of this region. And that basically implies and means that exposures are probably by many not fully understood yet. Yeah, and that very much includes also the primary insurance market. So that's number one. On top of that, we have an environment where still, and here is a big learning curve. I think you mentioned Europe, for instance, but also in the US, we have cat rates which are by a multiple higher than what we see here in Asia, even though we have in terms of frequency a lot of events here. Yeah, so I think, and we need, of course, also everyone in the industry, and that very much also includes, of course, our broking friends, that it is not meant to achieve just a good price. It's also meant to, improve our knowledge and finally arrive at a sustainable solution for everyone. Yeah. And you made and then that's all from my side. You also mentioned that it's like because they are so price sensitive. Right now there is an increasing preference to retain more business or of those exposures, which Victor, where you said they're actually growing, yeah, and they are growing substantially in some areas. So, which means also the primary insurance market, and here's where the regulators also have to be mindful or careful, and so the rating companies, by the way, they are retaining more and more, and they're maybe, and now I say it very bluntly, they start digging their grave if they don't realize what they're ultimately really getting into their balance sheet here. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've seen.
Don't quote me on that one. Yeah?
And we've seen almost a reverse in America, where obviously retentions are up, but they're buying more in the top players of their tower instead, which is where ILS often comes in. And so finally, we're running out of time here, so given the focus of the conference, it'd just be interesting to hear your thoughts or expectations for the continued use of alternative capital within Asia to support the needs of communities in the insurance industry here, but also to support Singapore's reinsurance market. Who would like to begin?
I can start. So Victor mentioned before that the ILS market is still relatively new in Asia, right? So one thing I would like to see is more infrastructure building. So from the legal side, modeling side, and so on. So hopefully we can build a bigger ecosystem with the infrastructure. So hopefully there are more expertise coming into this market to help do this. That's number one. And number two is the frictional cost, because as a buyer or as a seller, you always look at compare the traditional costs and also ILS costs. So we always look at the comparison. So that's the second part. And one thing that Allianz Group is also doing is try to simplify the products. I think one of the panelists talked about not to make the product too complex, right? So one thing that Allianz Group is doing is also to simplify the insurance product so that it's easy to be understood by the public and also by the policy holders. So can we do something like this also for ILS products? Because it could be very complicated, especially for outsider like me. It might be a bit too complicated to understand. So if you can simplify, probably it would enhance the development of the ILS market, actually. So that would be my view.
Maybe I'll just give you one, because I think Kenrick talked about a number of them, right? So I think if you want to make ILS a much stronger play in Asia, right, you need to be able to compete with Bermuda and other platforms. And currently, it takes far too long to issue a placement here, to carry out, because Hussein is here, right? He how long does it take? I don't know, but you're not talking about what Bermuda is doing, right? I think it's half a day to 1 day they can do a placement. Here, it just takes far too long. So if there's a way that everyone put together to find out how do we sort of make it quicker, right? So the regulatory support is important. But that needs to be done, because otherwise I don't see how we can compete with other places. Yeah.
And maybe a last comment. I think because we are getting here a pretty large crowd altogether in Asia, and we know about, and you mentioned some of them, we know about the challenges which are still attached to ILS sort of activities in this region. However, we should not forget how we, as sort of traditional reinsurers, how we started business in Asia, by showing up ourselves, by a presence, by staying alert, wait for the right time and opportunity, and then we stroke. So I wish you all good luck and success.
Yes, it's also about showing commitment as well. So, thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. Please put your hands together for the Singapore Reinsurance Association.